morning, everyone. We are following a series about the names of God, kind of following through the Old Testament, these moments that sometimes they are mentioned a lot, sometimes they're mentioned only once, and they reveal something of the character and something of the nature of God. And so we are going through each one. And today, if you've got Bibles, if you want to turn to Exodus 17, the name, so all of them proceed with the name Jehovah. Jehovah is the Old Testament name for God. In Jewish tradition, they don't mention the name of Yahweh, the name revealed to Moses, Yahweh. And so, in order to call God, they kind of made these other names like Adonai, Elohim, and Yahweh. And it's a way of saying Lord or God without actually saying the Yahweh word, because they want to respect the name of God in such a way that they will never say Yahweh. And so that's where we get the name Jehovah from. And the other word that we're going to look at today is the word Nissi, which sometimes gets translated as banner, sometimes refuge, and it's only mentioned once in the whole of the Old Testament, and it's here in Exodus 17. So I'm just going to read that now if you want to follow along with me. And it's just at the end of Exodus 17 from verse 8 to 16, until 15, sorry. And this starts talking about a battle with a group of people called the Amalekites. And they came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands." So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. And when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone, put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekites with the sword. And then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heavens." Moses built an altar, called it Jehovah Nissi, or the Lord is my banner. And he said, for hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. So this is this story of this battle. And at the end of this battle, Moses builds this altar, gives the name of the altar Jehovah Nissi. But before we kind of dig into that, I want to tell you a different story. And I want you to, it's a bit further in the future. It's the 8th of April, 1786. And it is in a small inn, it's no longer there, in the English cathedral city of Worcester. And this little inn called the Hop Pole. Two men. They travelled to the UK from America. They were only here for 8 days. And they spent most of that time in London, but they wanted to go to Worcester. If anyone's been to Worcester, it is not a significant city. It's got a lovely cathedral, it's got kind of lots of flat land around, but it's not the kind of place that people would travel in the 18th century, halfway around the world, to visit. But these two men did. One of them was a guy called John Adams. He was later to become the second president of the United States. The other man was a man called Thomas Jefferson, who became the third president of the United States. And they wanted to come, not to this inn, the Hop Pole. This was the place where they wanted to have a meal. They wanted to go to a hill just outside Worcester, a hill called Fort Royal Hill. And they'd made this journey halfway around the world, ate this meal together as they talked of revolution and independence. It was only 12 years after the USA signed the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson. The idea of independence came up by Jonathan Adams, and the two men responsible for independence wanted to go to this city. When we look at the Old Testament and when we follow the stories of this, the story of Israel and its development and its growth in the land that God had given it, we have these instances where something happens, God intervenes, God does something, and the very first response that the people have is to build an altar. They get a stack of rocks. They were never anything fancy or special to look at, but they stacked some rocks up and they dedicated it to God and they gave it a name. And we see here Moses did this, not just here, he did it several times as they kind of headed towards the promised land, but we see Noah does it straight coming out of the ark in memory of God rescuing his family. The first thing he does is he gets to dry land, stacks some rocks, dedicates it to God, and builds an altar. And we get Abraham does it. He has this covenant, this promise with God. God says that you are going to have children and they're going to number more than the stars in the sky. First thing he does, stacks some rocks, gives it a name, dedicates it to God. His son, Isaac, same thing. He has reaffirmed this covenant that his dad had. And God says that not only is Abraham's family going to be blessed, but it's going to go through you, Isaac. And the first thing Isaac does is he takes some rocks, stacks them up, gives it a name, dedicates it to God. And then Isaac's son, well, he has two sons, Esau, Jacob. Jacob is the one that God continues the story through. And there's this brilliant story where Jacob wrestles with an unknown assailant. In the middle of the night, he has this wrestling match and he won't let go. And he says, I'm not going anywhere until you bless me. And the stranger touches his hip, dislocates his hip. And from then on, Jacob walks differently. He also gets given a new name, Israel. And the first thing Jacob does when he wakes up in the morning, he takes the rock that he used as his pillow, builds an altar, calls it El Betel, which means that my God provides. And it was in that he names and declares what God's done. And it's this constant pattern that we see all the way up to the building of the temple. When they finally take the promised land, the last altar is built in the temple, and that becomes the place where they encounter God at this altar. But this is something that happens throughout. Every time God does something, an altar is built. And over time, towns and villages gather around these altars. It's where people stop on the way to somewhere else, and then slowly they build a building there, and they build a couple more buildings, and suddenly an altar turns into a town, and the town turns into a city, and the city bears the name of the altar, which bears the name of the thing that God did. And so, when we have this story of Moses winning this battle, the first thing he does is build an altar, gives it a name, and allows that name to be a declaration of who God is. Because in that battle, it wasn't Joshua's military prowess that won the battle. It wasn't Moses as the great strategist who stood at the top directing the troops. It was a battle that was won by God. It was something that God did, and Moses just had to be obedient to the God that fought for him. And so that's why he gives the name of this altar Jehovah Nissi, the Lord my banner. Because he recognised that it was God that had the victory, not him. The word Nissi gets translated in two different ways. Sometimes it's banner, sometimes it's refuge. And initially when I was reading this, they feel like two very, very different things. Banner, like a flag on one side, and in my mind I immediately get pictures of like national banners strung up a flagpole showing civic pride, or it might be a banner that we wave in church. It's on the end of a stick and we can wave it. And that's in my mind what I thought was meant to banner to declare something. And so a refuge didn't kind of equate with that. But when I started to look into this, I realised that banners were hugely significant in warfare, especially ancient warfare. Because when we think of battles and kind of armies, we either have in our minds modern warfare where we've got two sides and it's all very remote, and there's planes and tanks, or there's drones, and there's a limited number of troops that are all in camouflage and trying to not be seen. Or you get the kind of medieval or kind of Napoleonic idea of two armies lined up opposite sides of a valley, and they're all wearing bright colours, and you're all in one uniform, and you kind of stood next to a line of people who are all in red, and you're looking over the other side and they're all in blue, and you knew who you were fighting for, and you knew who you were fighting against. But when we look at what a biblical army looks like, it was a nation that was fighting. Moses was leading the nation of Israel into Canaan. So some of them would have had armour, if they could afford it, if they could get hold of it, but not everyone would have done. There wasn't a uniform. Moses didn't kind of get hold of sort of 300,000 sheep, slaughter them all and get everyone to wear the same sheepskin. It was whatever people could get hold of. And so an army lined up, once they start fighting each other, it was just a mass of bodies. You would know who the enemy was because they may look different to you, but you couldn't instantly recognise who you were fighting alongside. And so the best thing that you had was a banner, a great big pole, and on the end of the pole you would have a big piece of material that would be marked with the kind of mark of the king or mark of the leader. And so the leader would be fighting in the middle in the kind of chaos of battle, and he would have his strongest, fittest man to hold the banner up high so that everyone else knew the king was fighting. If the king hasn't fallen, the battle's still going on. There's still a chance we can win this. And so if you were stuck in the middle of a battle and you just looked up slightly, you would see the banner, which would give you hope that the king is still fighting. The other thing about banners and the way that they were used was it was a rallying point. If you were the strongest, if you were the best in the army, you would be gathered around the king or the leader, because you want to protect the banner and you want to protect the king. And so if you are getting tired, you're getting worn out, you're getting weary, you head for the banner. You gather under the banner because you know that you are with the strong. You know that the people are going to fight for you and fight on your behalf so that you can rest. And so the banner is a moment of hope, that there is one that is fighting that can overcome, but it's also a point of refuge. It's a place that you can go where someone can fight on your behalf. And so actually when Moses says that the Lord is his banner, he was declaring that God was the one that was fighting on behalf of the Israelites. And so every time somebody went past this stack of rocks, this little boulder that may have developed to a village or a town or a city, someone would go, what a weird name, you've called this Jehovah Nissi, what on earth is that about? And everyone would go, have you not heard? Have you not heard the story of why this town even exists? We don't have altars now. We don't have places that are named after the exploits of God, but what we do have is testimony. And testimony is, as we've talked about this morning, serves the same purpose as altars. It's a moment where we can talk about what God's done for us. We talk about the past. We talk about the exploits of God. Those moments where he's fought on our behalf, where we have sought refuge under his banner. And we have, in the English language, we have loads of different words for describing the past and what we do with history. Like the word reminisce. Reminiscence, that's where we remember something in the past. It was a fond moment. We want to feel good about that past, so we tell stories and we recount the things that have happened. And not because anything changes, but just because it was a good time and we can reminisce about the past. This Wednesday is my granddad's funeral, and I know as part of what will be happening around the funeral is we'll be reminiscing, we'll be talking about his life, we'll be talking about the things that happened. And it's one way of looking at history and the things that have happened to us. Another word that we might use is memorialise or memorial. This is where something bad has happened and we don't want it to disappear into the distance. And we memorialise it. We tell stories that are hard and difficult and they may not have ended well, but we still tell them because we don't want them to be forgotten. And that's a memorial. But testimony is not reminiscence and it is not a memorial. It is not us telling stories because, oh, this was a good time, and looking back then, this was how great this happened in the past. Testimonies are hopeful. It's a belief that God's done something once, and because God did it once, maybe he's going to do it again. And maybe that, again, isn't going to happen in your life, but maybe it's going to happen in someone else's life. The point of an altar was to create a place where people could come and meet God. You would use an altar to make a sacrifice, and then further down the line, someone else would see an altar, and if they need to make a sacrifice to God, they would do it on that altar. And actually, as we tell our testimonies, we don't know who's going to meet God on the altar of our testimony. As we share what God's done for us and the incredibly personal things, we don't know who needs to hear that. And actually, we're missing the opportunity for people to encounter the living God because we don't tell them what God's already done for us. Back to Worcester. I know I've told half a story, and you've probably got in the back of your mind, what on earth was going on there? John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they went from the hot pole outside Worcester. It's a less than a mile walk. If you've been to Worcester, it's a small city. And they walked to the top of this hill. At the time, it would have just been a barren hill. You got to the summit, and over the tree line, you could see the cathedral. But it was a place that they wanted to go to. And he stood at the top, and he realised this is the moment that he longed for, Adams especially, because this was the site of the final battle of the English Civil War. 200 years previously, or 150 years previously, the parliamentarian armies, who no one wanted a king, led by a guy called Cromwell, fought against the royalists who supported the king. And for a short period of time in our history, we didn't have a king because Cromwell defeated Charles I and Charles II, and the last battle, the final one that expelled Charles II out of England into France, was in Worcester, on this hill, this last point of the kind of stand between the parliamentarians and the royalists. And this, for the newly founded USA, was a significant thing because they had just declared their own separation from the king. They no longer wanted to be part of that kingdom, they wanted to be independent. And within 12 years, they wanted to go to the site that inspired the revolution. The site where they believed that England, I like the Queen, I like having a monarchy, so I disagree with them on that point, but they wanted to go somewhere that inspired this revolution that happened for them. And it was a place because of the story that was held there. And Adams said, let me just try and find the quote. He said this when he was stood on the top of the hill. It was only found in a diary in 2004. He said, do Englishmen so soon forget the ground where liberty was fought for? All England should come in pilgrimage to this hill once a year. I'm not advocating a pilgrimage to Worcester, but there is a sentiment that we can forget, and we can so easily forget. A place where liberty was fought for. And actually in our own lives, there was a place where your freedom was fought for. And it wasn't fought for by you. And you've got stories that are in your minds and in your past that tell of the goodness and the activity of God in your life. And they can be altars that other people meet God on. They can be places where people hear and see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And so, Moses wanted people to know that God had defeated the Amalekites, these people who had been tormenting and attacking the nation of Israel as they were traveling through the desert. He wanted people to know that God had done something. And so what does he do? He builds an altar. And he calls the altar, the Lord is my banner, my refuge, the place that I go for safety and security. And so I want to encourage you that you are all here because of something that God's done in your life. And you may long that he does the same thing again. Or you may long that he does something new. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't tell of the things that he's already done. The testimony is just bearing witness to something. It's not persuading people that God is real. It's not arguing with people about the merits of believing in God or following Jesus. It is being a witness and saying, this is what happened. Let God do the rest with that story. It's just saying, this is who I was, or this is what happened to me, and this is how God fought on my behalf. This is how God rescued and restored me. And allow God to do the rest. So just for Nicola and the team come up, let me pray, and then we'll close with some more worship. Father, we know that you are good. We know that you are gracious. We know that you are kind, and it's not just a head thing. We know it because we've seen it. We know it because we have got a experience of you that can't be taken away by anyone. And so we thank you for that. We thank you that we can remember the cross, that moment for all of us that everything changed. We thank you that you saw us while we were still far off, while we were still lost, while we were still far from you. And you had a plan, a way in which you knew that you could rescue us. And so this morning we come with our altars, our things that are our story, the things that you have done in our lives, and we place them before you. We want to see your kingdom come, and we want to point out when your kingdom is here, and we want to lead other people to your kingdom, and we just pray that you will bring to mind those things that you've done and give us opportunities to share those things with others in the weeks, in the months ahead. And we ask this in your name, God. In the powerful, resurrected name of Jesus. Amen. you.